Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I listened to Senator Sessions' questions, and I really think he really is moving us to where we ought to be. Mr. Cohen, when you went after or your organization went after the Ku Klux Klan, you were aware that their symbol was a flaming cross?
Yes, sir.
And that they believed that somehow they were espousing the teachings of Christ?
Right, they were purifying the race, yes.
And these race purifications ended up in hateful and violent and murderous tactics against African Americans.
That was the way they did business, yes.
Catholics, Jews. They were a hate-filled group that used a flaming cross and their purified Christianity for justification.
Yes.
Westboro Baptist Church sends demonstrators to the funerals of our fallen soldiers. I've seen them in Illinois. And they put up these hateful signs that say, this soldier died because of sodomy, because of gay marriage. Their homophobia, they believe, is part of their Christian belief. I think the point that has been made over and over by three members of this panel is it is a mistake for us to then call the Ku Klux Klan radical Christians, or to call Westboro Baptist radical Christians. They are extreme, they're violent, they're radical, they're unacceptable. But it reflects on all of us who count ourselves as Christians if you use a term that is so broad in its application. No one is arguing, Mr. McCarthy, that someone who possesses a dangerous ideology, dangerous to the United States, should ever be allowed to immigrate. But presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump isn't making that distinction, my friends. He wants to exclude all Muslim immigrants. That, to me, is where he has gone way beyond the needs of protecting America into territory which I hope this country will never, ever embrace. It's interesting to me that last week we had a debate on the floor of the Senate on terrorism, and the debate got down to the question as to whether or not we should be wary or careful when a suspected terrorist wants to buy an assault weapon, a firearm. And many of us said, let's err on the side of safety. And unfortunately, only 8 Republicans would join Senator Collins, another Republican, when she suggested that maybe we keep the guns out of their hands until we find out whether they truly should be on the no-fly list. We couldn't carry the day. So the presumption when it came to the Second Amendment was give them the gun, ask questions later. Now we have this hearing. And instead of dealing with suspected terrorists, we're dealing with a suspected religion. According to some. That's where I think we've crossed the line. If there are those who would abuse their religious beliefs, threaten others, and threaten America, for goodness sakes, use all of our power to protect us. But the notion that we would call for radical Christians, radical Islam, and such, and therefore have the right answer to keeping America safe, I think is just fundamentally wrong. And I'll say this, I had plenty of disagreements with President George W. Bush on a spectrum of issues. But I still marvel at the fact that after all we went through on 9/11, he would say to America, quote, all Americans must recognize that the face of terror is not the true face of Islam. Islam is a faith that brings comfort to 1 billion people around the world. It's a faith that has made brothers and sisters of every race. It's a faith based upon love, not hate. Thank you, President George W. Bush, for reminding us at that terrible moment in history who the real enemies were. They weren't people of the Islamic faith. They were those who had violent, extreme views and were ready to kill, to execute that, like the Ku Klux Klan, like the hate mongers of the Westboro Baptist Church. That president at that moment in history got it right, and we've got to get it right today. Because we're being called on, like many generations have in the past, to respond to a legitimate fear of terrorism in a way consistent with our American values. And when we lapse into this notion that we are going to condemn a faith, I think we've gone way too far. Ms. Kara, I know you wanted to say something earlier, but let me ask you first, do you live in a Muslim neighborhood?
No, I do not.
You know what a Muslim neighborhood is?
I was scratching my head a bit when I first heard that term used. The Muslim community in the United States, with few exceptions, is actually quite spread out and integrated into the broader America.
That's my experience too. I mean, I can show you some Irish Catholic parishes in Chicago and some areas on the North Shore where Jewish populations live, but the Muslim population is not that large per se, and they seem to be dispersed. And when we talk about patrolling and enforcing Muslim neighborhoods, as one member of this panel has, I'm at a loss. What was he trying to say? What is a Muslim neighborhood?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And Senator, if I could just add to your statement of acknowledging President Bush and what he did and the importance really of bipartisanship. I think this issue of really pushing back against these frankly un-American and unconstitutional proposals to marginalize and target a group of Americans based on their faith it's not consistent with the Constitution. It's not consistent with our values. And I might add that it's not just yourself and some members on your side of the dais, but I also want to specifically acknowledge Senator Flake and Senator Graham, who've been very courageous with their words as well in urging to tamp down this kind of divisive rhetoric.
Let me just add, and thanks Senator Graham who's here, but let me just add, I called Senator Flake at his home on a Saturday evening when he visited a mosque in Arizona and thanked him.
I sent personal thank you letters to Senator Flake and Senator Graham.
It was such a thoughtful gesture, totally consistent with what President George W. Bush reminded us.
That was the mosque I attend, Senator.
Yes. Well, I thank Senator Flake for having the courage to do it.
Thank
I
you.
yield the floor.
And Senator Durbin, can I just add one more thing that I wanted to say earlier, and that was, I just want to make it clear that there have been hundreds of imams and Islamic religious scholars in the United States and around the world that have condemned terrorism, routinely condemned terrorism, and in fact, there are a number of U.S. Muslim religious scholars who have actually taken on the narrative of ISIS, in fact, at great peril to themselves. A number of them have received specific death threats from ISIS because of that work that they're doing, and so I cringe when I hear people saying that Muslims are not speaking out against the contortion of their faith for violent ends.
Thank you.